a question for Daniel. So are UPC deadlines strict or not always? Please, Daniel, this is the question you need to answer. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mario, for the introduction. And I will answer your question in the next 10 minutes. And in light of the aperitivo hosted by our Italian colleagues, I'm having a beautiful Barolo. Well, the UPC has a strict regime of procedural deadlines, and the procedure and the relevant time limits are set out in the rules of procedure of the UPC. And the strict time limit regime is one of the defining features of the UPC system. And as a starting point, first instance infringement proceedings are intended to take approximately 1 year from the filing of the action to the final decision. And that's considerably shorter than many traditional national patent infringement proceedings in most member states. And that speed has clear advantages. Parties obtain legal certainty more quickly, and the system is designed to conduct proceedings efficiently. But its speed also creates significant pressure, particularly for defendants, because the defendant must respond to a patent infringement action within 3 months after service or within 2 months for a revocation action. And if the defendant wishes to file a counterclaim in those proceedings, it should also do that within the same short time frame. And the UPC judges have made clear that extensions of timeframes are absolute exception. This is reflected in 2 orders I will discuss today, order of the Paris Central Division and order of Düsseldorf Local Division, both of 2024. And taken together, these orders show respectively when an extension of time will not be granted and when it may. Both orders mentioned start with the same basic idea. The UPC operates under a strict time limit regime. Rule 9.3a of the Rules of Procedure empowers the UPC to extend deadlines, even retrospectively, but only upon a reasoned request by the parties. And this applies to time periods prescribed by both the Rules of Procedure and those set by the court. An extension is not intended to be a standard solution whenever a party would like more time. There must be special circumstances. And as said, the UPC was designed as a fast and efficient forum for patent disputes. And if deadlines were extended too easily, that purpose would be undermined. Legal certainty also plays an important role, and parties must be able to rely on the procedural rules and deadlines actually being binding. So as a first, a relevant order was issued by the Paris Central Division on 9 February of 2024. This order shows when a request for an extension of time should be rejected. The case concerned revocation proceedings, and the defendant requested an extension of the deadline for filing its statement of defense and possibly a counterclaim in these proceedings. And the court began with a general explanation of Rule 9.3, which rule gives the UPC a discretionary power to modify the deadlines by extending or even shortening these. But that power must be exercised in accordance with proportionality, flexibility, fairness, and equity according to the court. The court emphasized that deadlines in UPC proceedings serve several functions. They ensure speed so that proceedings can preferably be concluded within approximately 1 year. They protect legal certainty because parties know in advance which rules apply. They also safeguard the fairness of proceedings because both parties are bound by the same procedural framework. And they prevent the judge from interfering in favor of one party without the proper justification, therefore. And this leads to a strict test. A party requesting an extension must specifically allege and substantiate that it could not meet the deadline because of a circumstance that made the timely filing of the pleading objectively impossible or very difficult. And that's a high threshold. In this case, the requesting party relied on several circumstances, but none of them convinced the court. First, it argued that the statement of claim had been served without the annexes, but the court held that this was not sufficient, as the statement of claim can still be validly served without annexes if it clearly identifies the subject matter and the legal basis of the action. As a second, the party referred to problems accessing the case management system of the UPC, the CMS, but the court rejected this as well because the problems were not sufficiently proven. As a third, the illness of the party's long-standing European patent attorney was not accepted because it was insufficiently substantiated. And more generally, the court made clear that circumstances attributable to the party or his representative will normally not justify an extension. And as a final point, which carried significant weight, the request for an extension had been filed only on the last day of the relevant deadline, even though the alleged difficulties were already known at an earlier stage. Therefore, the court held that where a party is aware that it is unlikely to meet the deadline, it should act promptly and request an extension without delay. And in any case, waiting until the final day is incompatible with the principle of fairness which governs the UPC proceedings. And therefore, the request was rejected. Guidance on the circumstances in which an extension may be granted is provided by an order of the Düsseldorf Local Division dated 19 January 2024. The case concerned an infringement action brought against 15 defendants at once, and the majority of whom were established outside of Germany. At the time the court ruled on the request, service had been completed on only 3 of these 15 defendants, and as regards the remaining defendants, the service abroad was still ongoing, and it was unclear how long that process would take. And that gave rise to a practical difficulty, because if time limits were to run individually from the date of service on each defendant individually, multiple parallel 3-month deadlines would arise, and some defendants would be required to respond immediately, whereas others, the relevant period would not even have started. And this would lead to fragmented and inefficient proceedings. And the defendant's representative in this case therefore offered a practical solution, and they were prepared to act for all 15 defendants at once. And for the defendant who had not yet been served, they also waived the formal service. And this effectively removed the uncertainty associated with the completion of the service abroad. And the court considered this to constitute a justified ground for extending the deadlines applicable to those defendants who had already been served. But importantly, the extension was not granted merely to afford the defendants additional time. Rather, it served a concrete procedural purpose, namely to ensure that one uniform time limit regime would apply to all defendants. And the court therefore aligned the deadlines and set a single date applicable to all defendants for submitting the statement of defense. And the claimant's consent with setting this deadline also played a role, but that consent was not necessarily decisive on its own, but it supported the conclusion that extension was reasonable within these circumstances. Well, the key message here is that the UPC deadlines are strict as a matter of principle. The UPC is built around speed, predictability, and procedural discipline. Parties must therefore organize their case carefully from the beginning, but at the same time, the system is not entirely inflexible. Rule 9.3 of the Rules of Procedure allows for extensions of time, but that possibility is limited. A party must show an exceptional and objective reason, and that reason must be properly substantiated. And if a party sees a problem coming, it should not wait. It must document the problem, substantiate it, and bring it before the court as soon as possible. Together, the 2 orders show how the UPC approaches deadlines, strict as a starting point, but flexible only by way of exception. And at the Düsseldorf Local Division, that exception was present because the extension made the proceedings more efficient, but at the Paris Central Division, it was not, because the party had not sufficiently shown why the deadline was truly impossible to meet and had acted too late. The conclusion is therefore clear. In UPC proceedings, parties should proceed on the basis that deadlines are binding, and if a party needs an extension, it must act promptly, explain the issue precisely, and support the request of evidence. Without that, the court is unlikely to grant extra time. Thank you, and if there are no further questions, I will give the stage back to Mario.
We do have one. Thank you so much, Daniel, also for being on time. The question is, do you think the assessment, the central division's assessment is final or might be softened over time?
Of course, it's always possible to have it softened over time, but we have not seen in the last 2 years a new order from the central division on this topic. So for now, it seems final.
Okay, thank you. I also so that illness of lawyers should be carefully addressed. So it is better not to be ill during the proceedings before the UPC, or at least that you have a very grounded evidence in order to support that you are actually ill.
A doctor's letter, perhaps.
Yeah, perhaps. So thank you again